Professor Namyong Lee's commentary, long form, The Arrest of Venezuela's Dictator Maduro. When a nation's identity wavers, the nation becomes a battlefield. On January 3rd, 2026, the Trump administration of the United States carried out a large-scale strike operation against Venezuela and announced that it had arrested and transferred out of the country President Nicolas Maduro and his spouse. The incident has already spread shockwaves that shake the global diplomatic and security landscape, accompanied by controversy over international legal legitimacy and violations of sovereignty. From the perspective of unrestricted warfare, however, what matters even more is not a moral trial of legal or illegal, but a systems-level question: how did a conclusion of this form become possible at all? Unrestricted warfare is a kind of war in which victory or defeat is decided before the gunfire begins, and its decisive factor is not a simple sum of military power, but the fixation of national identity and the direction of a country's connective architecture. If you reduce the US targeting of Venezuela to anti-American rhetoric, you miss the core. In unrestricted warfare, an opponent does not interpret messages, it analyzes connections. The routing of financial settlement, the ownership and operation of communications and data infrastructure, the contractual architecture of energy and resources, subordination to technological standards, the movement of elite assets and overseas networks, and the collapse of domestic governing legitimacy are read as a single bundle. Venezuela did not become a bombing target overnight. Sanctions, financial pressure, information warfare, and internal fragmentation accumulated for a long time, and then upon entering an irreversible phase, a jump to physical force occurred. Unrestricted warfare does not separate war from policing, diplomacy from law. It blends those boundaries to eliminate the adversary's options. Numbers show that Venezuela's collapse was not merely partisan conflict, but a bankruptcy of trust in state functions. Since 2014, the number of refugees and migrants who have left Venezuela has been cited in international organization statistics at roughly 7.7 to 7.9 million. The figure presented by UNHCR, the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees, is about 7.9 million. When a country experiences population outflows on this scale, it is not simply an economy that has been shaken. It is effectively a declaration that the national operating system can no longer provide a guarantee to its people. It is not only people who leave, human capital, technology, data, and the future exit together. In unrestricted warfare, this is a sign of regime defeat that appears before military defeat. When information warfare is added, collapse accelerates. After Maduro's arrest, the space of social networking services, SNS, began to be contaminated in an instant with recycled clips, manipulated scenes, and artificial intelligence, AI, generated content. The method of overlaying fake reality on top of real events to disrupt the public's judgment system is textbook unrestricted warfare. Bullets struggle to cross borders, but information neutralizes borders. The moment a population loses what is true, the state collapses first, not from an external strike, but from internal confusion. In unrestricted warfare, the first line of defense for national identity is not a military unit, but the order of truth. Now we must turn this mirror toward the Republic of Korea. Korea is fundamentally different from Venezuela. We have fixed our national identity: liberal democracy, a market economy, the rule of law, and a maritime order of freedom anchored in the ROK-US alliance through war and cost. Yet in the era of unrestricted warfare, it is not enough to declare that our identity is clear. Identity must be embedded not as a policy sentence, but as systems design, where financial settlement, communications infrastructure, energy networks, core technology standards, defense industrial supply chains, military interoperability, and the hubs of national data are fixed in a given order is what proves a country's affiliation. An adversary does not read speeches, it dissects the connectivity graph. The problem is that signs have been detected suggesting that Korea's national direction has been approaching a dangerous boundary in recent times. The Lee Jae-myung administration's approach toward China is not merely a matter of diplomatic rhetoric. From the perspective of unrestricted warfare, it can be read as a signal of a possible systems choice, a China-centered supply chain logic, an attitude that places transactions ahead of values, and ambiguous language on sensitive diplomatic and security issues may each appear tactical when viewed separately, but when accumulated they become a structural message. For example, the phrase security with the United States, economy with China is extremely ambiguous and dangerous. In unrestricted warfare, ambiguity is categorized not as neutrality, but as vulnerability. International statistics explain why this vulnerability is lethal. Reports indicated that Korea's annual exports in 2025 surpassed $700 billion for the first time, and that semiconductor exports also reached a record high of $173.4 billion. These numbers are both a blessing and a warning. Korea survives on trust in the rules of global markets and in the credibility of settlement, logistics, and standards. When that trust wavers, an exporting nation is immediately reclassified as a risk state. In unrestricted warfare, a single line in a tariff schedule, a single line on a sanctions list, or a single line in technology export controls can block a nation's arteries. That is why identity is not emotion, it is survival infrastructure. The larger environment is equally cold-eyed. SIPRI, the Stockholm International Peace Research Institute, summarized that in 2024, global military spending increased by 9.4% in real terms to a record $2.718 trillion, and that the share of military spending in global GDP, gross domestic product, was about 2.5%. The world is already moving toward an integrated battle space in which military, economy, and technology merge into one. In this environment, pragmatism without identity is not diplomacy, but neglect. Neglect is the dismantling of deterrence, and the dismantling of deterrence opens a window of miscalculation for an adversary. I issue a clear warning to the Lee Jae-myung administration. Korea is not a buffer zone between the United States and China. It is already a core forward outpost of the free world. The moment we blur this status by our own hand, the United States may reclassify Korea not as a trustworthy ally, but as a variable to be managed. In unrestricted warfare, few things are more dangerous than the downgrading of an alliance. Downgrading signals rising costs of deterrence, increases the possibility of delayed support in a crisis, and amplifies uncertainty across finance, technology, and supply chains. And I also issue a warning to Kim Jong-un. The Korean Peninsula is not a laboratory. The moment you design provocations by treating Korea's internal confusion as an opportunity, the survival space of your regime does not expand, it contracts. Provocations strengthen alliance cohesion, tighten the net of surveillance, interdiction, and sanctions, and squeeze the lifeline of North Korea's economy even further. Above all, if miscalculation triggers a full-scale conflict, the first and heaviest price will be paid by the people of North Korea. If you claim to speak of regime security, then stop military gambling and end the governance that holds your people hostage. There is only one heavy lesson that the Venezuela case delivers to the Korean Peninsula. A hegemon does not wait for an ally whose identity is wavering. Pressure accumulates without notice, and when a line is crossed, action jumps without warning. Therefore, what Korea needs now is not pro-Americanism or anti-China sentiment, but the recovery of Koreanness. As a liberal democratic nation, we must make clear which order we belong to, and we must fix that choice as structure across finance, technology, military affairs, and diplomacy. In the era of unrestricted warfare, a nation does not survive by declarations. It survives only when identity is made into structure. If we ignore this lesson, the bombs that fell from Venezuela's sky will never remain someone else's story. Thank you for watching Professor Namyong Lee's commentary, long form.